Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today I've got a bit of a beginner's guide for Expeditions Rome, the brand new tactical strategy RPG in the Expedition series that puts you in charge of Roman military operations in Asia Minor, North Africa, and Gaul over the course of multiple campaigns. You'll lead your band of adventurers across various locations, engaging in tactical battles, and you'll order your legions around too, engaging in larger scale strategic battles. And every step of the way will introduce new challenges, rougher odds, and more complications. There is a lot to get through, from tactical combat to strategic battles and more besides, all outlined in the chapter markers down below, so let's not waste any more time and dive in. The various action points. I know what you're thinking. Action points are the most basic of things in this genre. How could this possibly warrant its own section? Bear with me, because things work a little differently in Expeditions Rome. The first thing you need to keep in mind is that movement and action points are separated in Expeditions Rome. Action points are represented as these orange diamonds that replenish every turn, and any skill that uses an action point will say as much. Alternatively, you can move beyond your regular movement range into yellow marked tiles by spending that same action point for extra movement rather than an action. So far, it probably seems quite familiar. But there are also some actions that cost these square points to use. Any skill that costs squares will have a limited number of uses in a battle, represented by the number of squares at the bottom of the icon in the action bar. So when the skill says it'll cost a square to use, it's referencing the squares beneath the skill itself that'll disappear one by one every time you use the skill. You can use these skills and still have an action point left over to do something else with, or you can use these skills even if you don't have an action point left to use. But if the cost of a skill shows a diamond and a square, that means you'll have to consume an action point and a charge when using the skill in question. Finally, tactical equipment is marked as costing circles to use. These circles represent charges as well, but you can only use one tactical item per turn, and these circles do not automatically replenish between tactical battles, whereas squares under the skills do. In order to get more circles back between battles, you need to craft, loot, pick up, or be given tactical equipment for these circles to replenish, and that happens over story beats or with a strategic layer of the game, which we'll touch on in just a little bit. So you have diamonds, squares, and circles as three different categories of action points. That means you can, in one turn, move, attack, use a skill that costs a square, and use a tactical item that costs a circle, though not necessarily in that order. It is super important to appropriately budget your action point usage in any given turn, and to remember which types of skills and actions do or do not impede on which others. Using and budgeting your action points makes a huge difference, especially as you get further along in Expeditions Rome and the battles start to get a bit more challenging. Properly choreographing your tactical moves can be the difference between life and death. Now, on the topic of skills and actions, let's talk about equipping skills and actions. Again, you might be thinking this is a very basic topic, and again, I implore you to bear with me since Expeditions Rome does things a little differently. For one, any actions you can take in battle are derived from two sources: the way you've upgraded your character through the skill tree, and the way you've equipped them. Characters gain experience over time, and it's important to note that characters that aren't present on any given mission might gain less experience than those that are, depending on the mission. This means that you'll sometimes get a disparity in skill levels across your party's members, and this is something you'll want to balance, as over-investing in a character who dies can be a bit of a setback if you're not careful. But I digress. As characters gain experience and level up, you'll be able to unlock or upgrade their skills down 3 columns, each with their own twist on the character's overarching class. You're not really restricted to one or the other, but as you can imagine, the most powerful of skills are further down any given column, which means sometimes you'll want to focus down one to get to the bottom faster, and at other times you'll spread skills out among the 3. Some skills are passive, denoted by the round shape of the icon, and these skills are always sort of active, either providing your character or their allies buffs or enemies debuffs. A good one to have, for example, is the increase to health that's available to some classes. Active skills, meanwhile, don't just need to be unlocked, but need to be actively used in combat, costing, as described in the previous section, a diamond action point, a square charge, or a diamond action point and a square charge. The other way characters acquire actions and skills is through their equipment. We discussed tactical equipment briefly in the previous section, equipment that is crafted, looted, otherwise picked up, or given to your characters. These take up slots as shown here on the character inventory screen. Apart from them, however, are your weapon sets, and these are where your remaining skills are derived from. Any given piece of equipment in your hands will provide your character with a unique set of skills to use in battle. Their main hand and their offhand equipment come into play here, and sometimes a combination of the two will unlock additional skill options. At times, two pieces of equipment will give access to more skills than you have room for on your action bar, so make sure to pick and choose the ones you actually want access to in battle. Hovering over a weapon or shield will tell you what skills you'll be getting through equipping them, and you can see details about those skills in the equipment screen too. The kind of damage it causes, any ways to improve its effects, what it costs to use, etc., etc. With two equipment sets available, you should try and kit your characters out for different circumstances. Perhaps their first set is for use against enemies weak to slashing, while their second set is for use against enemies weak to bludgeoning. Maybe one set is ranged and the other is melee, whatever it is. Don't hesitate to stay versatile. Changing which weapons you're using costs nothing mid-battle, though you'll need to have a diamond action point available to swap between them. So again, even though it doesn't cost a diamond action point to swap, you just need to have one on hand to do so. And that's a very important distinction. If you have one equipment set that includes a shield, for example, and the enemy has a lot of archers, you're going to want to make sure you've swapped to the shielded equipment set mid-battle before you use that action point and you find yourself walking around with a shield on your back, eating a bunch of arrows. Don't hesitate to leave folks with empty hands either, by the way. There are some skills that are very useful that only come with empty hands, at least one. Aid stops allies from bleeding out or burning to death. Throwing sand in enemies' eyes can be extremely useful to help blind them. Empty hand skills are modified based on the character, so be sure to check them before getting rid of them. Ultimately, you're hoping to create synergies between your character's equipment. If a melee combatant can cause extra damage when an enemy is bleeding, then maybe your archer should have a weapon and skill on hand that can make an enemy bleed. If you have equipment that causes more damage when flanking an enemy, then maybe having a pair of flankers top of mind is a good idea. In Expeditions Rome, you don't equip people based on the skills they already have. You equip them based on the skills you want them to have, and the utility and survivability as well, of course. On which note, let's discuss shields and armor. While shields are carried in hand, armor is, you guessed it, worn. But there's a difference between what you wear and the mechanical impact of the armor itself, and misunderstanding the difference when up against an armored enemy can make them literally impermeable. That's not an exaggeration, literally impermeable. A shield will act as a separate health bar that completely protects a character's actual health bar, represented by the blue bars above the red health bars. If you or an enemy has even the tiniest bit of shield, then all damage from an attack will be absorbed by the shield, unless the attack specifically states that it cannot be blocked or that excess damage bleeds over. This means that when you're up against an enemy with shields, you need to either use attacks that say they cannot be blocked, or you need to reduce the shield bar down to 0 before pummeling their health bars. Don't waste the heavy hits on weakened shields. Finish weakened shields off with weak attacks and bring the heavy hits in afterwards to actually hit the HP bar. Shields can also deflect certain attacks entirely if they have even 1 point of health. You'll see this mentioned when you're picking an attack. A great example is with an archer. Any ranged shots will clearly state that they can be deflected by shields, and this means that not only will the shot not cause any HP damage, it'll also not cause any shield damage either. Use this to your advantage. If you find yourself up against a bunch of ranged units and you have shields, swap over to the equipment appropriately to get the deflections. Separate from shields, you'll notice certain actions will allow you to deflect incoming attacks as well. This applies to melee and ranged attacks both. One final thing about shields is that they can be buffed, and they can replenish through actions, or through the Strong status effect. Each stack of Strong replenishes some shield strength at the beginning of their turn. Think of it like a soldier regaining composure and bringing their shield back under their proper grip and control. You're not breaking a shield when you lower its bar, you're just throwing your target off guard and it can be regained. The same applies to you. Some skills will buff your shield points and some skills give the Strong status, which works, as I just explained, to regain that shield strength at the top of your turn. This replenishing shield means that you don't want to let somebody live for too long after you've reduced their shield down to 0, because you're just giving them an opportunity to regain composure and get the shield bar filled back up. Again, remember that attacks that cannot be blocked ignore shields entirely, so rather than dealing with shields directly, you can just opt to have a bunch of these weapons on hand and ignore them instead. Alternatively, using Pila or other equipment to apply Shield Broken on a shielded enemy will prevent their shields from replenishing. Armor, meanwhile, can have a variety of impacts. The most easily evident are the ones shown when hovering over a piece of armor, but there's the actual armor value itself, which can absolutely change the situation on the battlefield. Armor points are represented as gold bars next to a character's health bar, and the armor will absorb all damage directed at the character's HP up to the number of gold bars, the total armor value. What's more, armor doesn't get chipped away like shields do. Merely doing damage to a target will not reduce its armor. Armor will only be reduced by attacks that specifically say they shred armor. Not all attacks shred armor, and those that do shred armor tend to do so very quickly. Taking out a heavily armored enemy is no easy task. It takes a concentrated effort with specific tools. Pila are an excellent bit of tactical equipment for the task, but there are weapons and skills that can be used too. Keep an eye out for these gold bars and consider keeping your distance from heavily armored enemies until you've removed their armor at least by enough to make sure that you can actually hit them and cause damage to their HP. Any damage that hits an armored enemy that goes over the number of gold bars they have protecting them will do direct damage to their HP. So yes, you can overwhelm and overpower armor, unlike shields, but you're reducing the effectiveness of your attack, because whereas you would be doing a certain amount of damage, you now have to subtract that armor value. So shredding armor is extremely important in making sure you can efficiently take care of enemies. When engaging an enemy, keep in mind that attacks will first hit the shield, then the armor, and only then will they hit the health bar. So a shielded and armored foe has quite a bit of protection. Now, once armor and shields are taken care of, you can concern yourself with damage, damage types, and resistances. Damage comes in a few forms in Expeditions Rome, and the most common is direct damage from a weapon or a shield used as a weapon. Typically, a range, you can pick your weapons based on higher highs and lower lows, or tighter ranges, or any of the countless other modifiers they might apply, as well as their damage type. Whatever weapon you choose to use, you'll always get a visual representation of damage output when targeting enemies as a quick way to see if damage is going to get blocked by shields or armor, and how likely you are to cause damage should the hit land. Despite what you might see here though, you have to worry about the damage type you're planning on using, and your target's resistance to said damage type. With slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning weapons, you'll be up against the target's resistance to those types of damage. Resistance here represents a percentage chance that your attack of that damage type will be reduced to a glancing blow. To clarify, resistance isn't a percentage reduction of the actual damage that'll happen. It's the percentage chance that your attack will be reduced to a glancing blow. Having a hit reduced to a glancing blow can be the difference, once again, between life and death. A glancing blow does only 25% of the damage it was initially going to do, so if you were coming in with, let's say, 4 points of damage and applying bleeding to the enemy, but it becomes a glancing blow, you're only causing 1 point of damage, so this can break a strategy you were hoping to apply. It can slow your roll and it can turn the tide against you. Pay very close attention to your enemy's resistances and choose your weapons and attacks accordingly to avoid the resistances. Remember to switch between equipment sets if needed. This is a good reason to have different damage types available across different characters and different sets. In a worst case scenario, you can always try and flank an enemy to reduce all the resistances to 0. To flank a character, you need to have a pair of your characters on either side of them. They need to be 180 degrees apart, on literally either side of the target. Not almost 180 degrees, not side by side and simply outnumbering the enemy. They have to be on opposite ends. For as long as that's the case, the target is considered flanked, and then anybody can attack from any angle, and they don't have to worry about resistances, even if they weren't among the first two characters that caused the flanked status effect to be applied. Now, once you've overcome all these obstacles, you can finally consider looting and equipment. This one's a short section, but important nonetheless. Keep in mind that bodies aren't automatically looted at the end of combat. Keep in mind also that clicking on a body to loot it will automatically loot nearby bodies as well, but not all bodies on the entire map. Make sure you don't just loot one, see a bunch of tabs, and assume you've looted everybody. If you're not sure what has or hasn't been looted, press left Alt or V. In between me booting the game up one day, it went from being V to being left Alt. So check what your control scheme says. Because again, initially it was V and then one day it decided to become left Alt for me. Either way, use that button to highlight interactive items. In fact, even if you're confident in the targets of your looting, hit that key just to highlight interactive items anyway. Sometimes it'll point out secrets you might otherwise have missed, or it might point out chests that look relatively nondescript but carry great equipment. Heads up, on the campaign map, tapping this key alternates between showing you everything and nothing as far as labels are concerned, and if you ever find your map looking like this, tap that key to have it look like this instead, full of very useful information. Back to looting equipment though, make sure to deal with the actual swapping of equipment before you travel to a new location. You'll sometimes enter a new location and be immediately thrown into combat, and you cannot change equipment mid-combat outside of swapping between your two equipment sets per character. I don't think I have to explain why that can be a problem. One more thing to keep in mind is that equipment skills that need you to pair two different kinds of equipment, like sword and shield or sword and dagger, won't show up unless you click to view them all, and only then will you be able to see what you're missing. Keep checking this section to make sure you're not giving up on an ideal synergy because you never knew it existed. Now, once you've unlocked the armory at your outpost, you'll be able to craft equipment using materials you've scavenged, with dice rolls determining end results. Remember to actually learn new schematics you pick up by going to the crafting tab of your inventory and holding right-click on the schematics you want to learn. Once you do so, you'll be able to craft the relevant items at your armory. Meanwhile, upgrading old equipment will allow you to maintain the associated skills that came with it while buffing its stats, meaning you can keep your favorites for far longer. Using the battlefield. It might come as absolutely no surprise that there is more available to you than just the weapons and tools you walk onto a battlefield with. Cover can either be high or low, and if you're in cover, you cannot be hit from a 60-degree cone on the other side of the cover. Cover doesn't partially protect you, cover doesn't change the chance of being hit, you simply cannot be hit from 60 degrees on the other side of cover. Keep in mind though, that while anybody can stand behind high cover, not all characters can take advantage of low cover. Those that can will crouch when up against it, but if an enemy stands adjacent to them, they'll stand up and be exposed again. On the topic of the terrain itself, don't hesitate to use the high ground for advantages to your archer's range. Archers will have 100% hit chance within a certain range, with shots beyond that range being less accurate until they can't hit at all. Using high ground means this 100% hit chance can happen further along on the battlefield. Fire is a useful tool for causing burning damage to an enemy over multiple turns. Throw torches or fire pots, force the enemy to walk through fire, or have them standing next to a burning tile when the fire spreads and they might start burning. For as long as they're burning, they might be hit with a stack of the burned status effect at the start of their turn, which reduces their maximum HP by 20%. The burning character's fire resistance tells you how likely they are to remove the burning status instead, and you can always use water to either douse a fire or apply the wet status effect to a character, increasing their fire resistance by 80%. Keep an eye on your and your enemy's status effects, and consider the number of stacks where relevant to understand what might be coming your way. For example, if two shielded enemies have had their shields reduced to 0, but one has 2 stacks of strong and the other has 3, you know which is going to get more of their shield back next turn. Keep an eye out for potential deflections and don't hesitate to use them yourself. If you have to trigger an attack of opportunity, maybe use a skill that allows you to deflect enemy attacks first. If you're up against somebody who has deflections on hand, maybe use weak attacks to waste them before using a heavy hitter. Don't underestimate the power of morale damage either. Make sure you've taken care of any enemy leaders, represented by laurels around their icons, and then use abilities to try and reduce enemy morale to the point that they panic. This will make them either run away or attack their own allies if there are any in range. But enough talk about the tactical battles. Let's switch gears to the strategic layer of Expeditions Rome. Let's next talk about strategic resources. You can get ahead of the game a little by taking matters into your own hands with regards to strategic resources. First, it's important to note that there are a few levels of strategic resources. On the world map, you'll need denarii for anything money can buy, slaves to build resource gathering points, rations to keep everybody fed every 8 hours, and medicine to treat injuries when on the road. At your outpost, you'll need lumber mills, farms, tanneries, and iron mines to build upgrades. The world map resources can be acquired as loot after battles and in chests littered across the world map and at various locations, but you can also trade them at the markets. Sometimes you'll find marketplaces around the map, but if you're ever in desperate need for something, you can always head to your own outpost to seek out the trader there. Values of goods increase and decrease over time, and you can take advantage of fluctuations to keep your soldiers well stocked. Food and medicine, I would say, are of utmost importance. Without food, your soldiers go hungry in your legions and in your personal party, and without medicine, you won't be able to heal wounds. Your party members can get wounded in battle, but they can also be wounded during side quests or during the text-based multiple choice narrative events that pop up from time to time on your travels. However the wounds come about, they can deteriorate and kill a character if they're not tended to. Some wounds are critical right off the bat, while others are light and worsen over time towards the critical state. And as the wound gets worse, the wounded character's stats and battle prowess will be more and more negatively affected too. Make sure to have medicine and a properly trained party member on hand to prevent death on the road through something as trivial as a boar that ripped your guts open during a hunt. That would be embarrassing. Alternatively, return to your outpost to treat wounds. Slaves are an essential resource that you can also get through missions on the map and winning strategic battles. They're used on Legion missions, and these are essential if you want to acquire the aforementioned outpost resources like lumber mills, farms, etc., etc. Keep in mind that each such location counts as one of the resource it provides. A tannery is one tannery. It does not produce one leather per month or anything like that. So when you capture, say, a farm and build a bath at your outpost using said farm, that's it. You're not getting that resource back. You're not able to build another upgrade using that farm. You now need another farm in order to build any other upgrade that also needs a farm. Use your resources wisely to make sure you have access to what you need sooner rather than later. Getting your speculator tent set up early and assigning somebody to it, for example, will allow you to replenish tactical items freely every so often, rather than having to pay to craft them. It depends partly on playstyle and potentially on gameplay spoilers, so I won't make recommendations here, but consider if you want your legion to be stronger when defending sooner or later, and if you want to rush the stockpile for an ever stronger legion, or, well, you get the picture. Take a look at the upgrade chart, get an idea of how you want to prioritize your resource use, because yes, when you acquire a resource, you use it once, and then it's gone, and you have to acquire more of it if you want to use it elsewhere. Do remember to keep sending legions out on missions to keep acquiring world map resources or outpost resources through the conquest of resource production sites. Do also keep an eye on your timeline though. Sometimes you'll know that an attack is coming for you, and that knowledge might paralyze you until you realize, hang on a second, the attack is actually 48 hours away, and you have plenty of time to go around conquering with your legions before they have to be home to defend your territory. Legion management. Your legions are an essential element to your conquests for Rome. As you can imagine, your band of just a few individuals isn't about to subjugate entire regions, so you'll be sending your legions out to put cities under siege, to acquire resource points, and to do battle as aggressors and defenders alike. Over time, you'll sometimes have the strength of your legions deteriorate, typically due to losses taken in battle or due to soldiers that have gone missing. Your outpost will allow you to recruit new soldiers into your legions, but this comes at a hefty cost. While you won't necessarily need excessive numbers at all times, consider what your upcoming battles might need of your legions and fill their ranks accordingly. Rather than spending the money to acquire more warriors, however, you can focus instead on morale. Each point of morale counts as 10 points of combat strength, positive or negative, added to or removed from your actual soldier count. Morale can fluctuate wildly based on decisions made on and off the battlefield, and you should keep an eye out on it as a key way of tipping battles in your favor. One particularly helpful tool off the battlefield is to have a Praetorian with the social trait assigned to the bath. Every 32 hours or so, he'll increase the morale of the legion, making them more effective on the battlefield. Fewer men who are more willing to fight for their realm will outdo more men with weaker wills. That's not to say numbers themselves don't count, and if mid-battle you find some soldiers have gone missing, don't hesitate to use stratagem that returned them. Keep in mind that these returned soldiers only return from the gone missing number, so don't expect any effects if none have actually gone missing. On the topic of soldiers returning, if you want to make sure the enemy soldiers don't return to harass you at a future junction, you should try and reduce their strength past this marker during battle. At the end of battle, you'll have the opportunity to chase them down, but only do this if you haven't already crossed the threshold, causing them to shatter and disperse. If you've crossed it during regular fighting, you don't need to worry about chasing the enemy down, as no matter what's left, they'll be dispersing, never to face the might of Rome again. If you're interested in an in-depth conversation about how strategic battles work beyond what I've gone over in this video, let me know in the comments down below. Today's video has gotten long enough, but the details are well worth investigating separately rather than rushing through them. But that brings us to the end of this video. Hopefully you found it helpful and your future endeavors involve plenty of coming, seeing, and conquering. If you enjoyed the video, don't hesitate to let me know by leaving a like and a comment down below, and if you'd like to see more like it, let me know down below too. If you've got any pointers of your own you'd like to share, as always, they're very welcome in the comments. And for more strategy, tactical, and RPG gaming reviews, previews, let's plays, guides, and more, do not hesitate to subscribe to this channel. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.